These are the organisms that you need to know from this week's lab that are not the bacteria, right? The bacteria, you need to know the different bacterial shapes and the qualities that makes a bacteria or archaea a bacteria or archaea, because they're they're prokaryotes. But now we're talking about protistans. Oh yeah, prokaryote, protistan, those sound alike. Well, they're not alike. Prokaryotes are the bacteria and the archaea, and protistans, you need a microscope to see them, but once you're looking at them through the microscope, they're actually rather large. And there are some protistans that are so big you could climb on them. They're really big. These are the ones that we are going to be studying in this week's lab. Particularly, you need to know the plasmodium. The plasmodium, this is an image of plasmodium infecting red blood cells here. It is the protistan agent that causes malaria. I think when we hear that there's a disease like malaria or like COVID-19, we might think that it's caused by a bacteria or that it's caused by a virus, but not very many of us realize that they can be caused by an entirely different type of life. And in this case, malaria is caused by plasmodium. And you're going to want to remember that for next week's quiz. We're also going to look at paramecium. They don't cause diseases, but paramecium is a good example of a ciliate, meaning they move around with these little tiny fringe kind of things all over their bodies called cilia. We're going to look at amoeba. This is one image of amoeba. The amoebas, when you look at them through a typical microscope, you put a cover slip on the side and it just flattens them out, and they look very, very boring. But in real life, you can see that they're actually very exciting looking. And amoeba, they actually are really dominant predators in their environment. Those things are predators. They're like the lions of the Serengeti, except for in a drop of pond water. Now, these first three, these are heterotrophs, heterotrophs, and heterotrophs need to eat something, okay? So these are heterotrophs. These next guys, these guys here, they are autotrophs, which means they can do photosynthesis. So euglena uses a flagella to swim around. That'll be useful knowledge to have. Spirogyra, they don't move at all, but they have a very beautiful appearance through a microscope. And diatoms have got cell structures made out of glass. They actually make glass around them. So these are microscopic organisms from this week's lab, and these are macroscopic, meaning, yeah, you do not need a microscope to see them. And these are three different kinds of seaweed that we will be talking about in this week's lab. So let's look at these things. Let's start by, what did I do? Let's start by looking at paramecium. Down here on the lower right, we can see a drawing of paramecium. Paramecium, when you look at it in a drop of pond water through the microscope, it kind of looks like a house slipper that's a little bit twisted. And the paramecium are covered by little tiny fringe. And it's not just around the outsides, like 360 degrees. It's covered by these, do you see these little guys? Little tiny cilia. So if I ask you, to give me an example of a protist that moves with cilia, you would tell me paramecium. Paramecium is animal-like in the sense that it needs to eat. And one of the videos we have for you to watch, it's really short, it's like a minute long, is a video of this animal eating. And the way they eat, they don't have a digestive tract. They're only one cell big, but they take food in and kind of, as they're taking food in, they kind of blow up a little balloon that is going to be a vesicle. And then when it's filled, it just pops off, And as it pops off, then a new one will fill and a new one will fill. So it's kind of interesting. So like in here, that and that and that, these are little, they went into, food went into their stomach and those little bubbles kind of popped off and slowly that organism is going to digest them. So you need to know about paramecium. They're ciliates because they swim by cilia. They are heterotrophic, meaning they need to eat. They mostly eat algae and bacteria and dead stuff. They, what else is important about them? You know, these guys are kind of like the zebras and the antelope on the plains of the Serengeti in that they are fast, but they are something that the lions eat, right? Okay, so which cells of the human body have cilia? All of your airways are lined, sorry, all of your airways are lined with cells that are covered with cilia. Right. Now this one I'm just throwing in there. This is actually not going to be on your quiz, so I probably should skip by it. But this is Vorticella. Now, Vorticella, doesn't it kind of look like a flower? It kind of looks like a flower. It does mostly hold still, and then it has got these cilia all around its mouth. And it does not look like a predator, but it is. It will actually eat things, and it doesn't use its cilia to swim around. It uses its cilia to catch things and to bring them down into this area where it can digest it. So these are heterotrophs. The reason it looks green there is not because it can photosynthesize, Vorticella cannot, it's because it eats algae. So it's kind of a predator. Now, let's talk more about the amoeba. Amoeba is really classical, right? And how do amoeba move? Well, paramecium use what? Look at your notes. Yes, paramecium use cilia. Amoeba use pseudopods. Pseudopods means false feet. So that's what they're called. And when you look at an amoeba under a typical light microscope, it's got a cover slip on it. Here it is eating a paramecium. And it just reaches out like the blob, you know, and just wraps itself around it, and it phagocytoses. It phagocytoses the paramecium. So in a pond, the amoeba would be like the lions of the Serengeti, and the paramecium are like the zebra or the antelope. The paramecium are fast, but they get eaten, and the amoeba, they get big and fat. So under a light microscope, an amoeba looks like that. But if you were able to shrink yourself down into a droplet of pond water, it looks like this. They're reaching out, and all of these little grabby arms, any one of them could grab onto a paramecium going by, and boom, paramecium is lunch. There is an amoeba that eats brains, which doesn't seem nice. It's called Naegleria fowleri. That is not going to be on the quiz, but there is a brain-eating amoeba. Now, that amoeba, it actually looks just like this one, and it lives in pond water, and it has absolutely no desire for brains that we know of. But if the amoeba gets up your nose, like when you're a little kid, you get water up your nose a lot. So when kids are swimming in a pond and they get water up their nose, then it actually can go right through the nerves that allow you to smell things, and it'll digest your brain. And it's usually fatal. We could treat it if we could diagnose it early enough, but it usually gets diagnosed rather late. And it is the reason why little kids that swim in lakes and ponds in Texas usually wear nose plugs, right? Malaria, right? Now, Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba, it really doesn't kill very many people, but malaria does. Malaria kills more than a million people in the world every year. 90% of them are in Africa, and 70% of the deaths are children under the age of 5. So malaria in places where it has its most fatal form, malaria is it is a catastrophic drain on the development of the society and its economy. So malaria is not just a world health problem, but it is an economic problem for the world. Um, we are getting close to finding ways to prevent or effectively eradicate malaria from populations. We're getting close, and it is definitely a worthwhile endeavor. Now, it is caused by a protistan called plasmodium, and that is very likely to be on the quiz. So make sure you know the organism that causes malaria. So to give you an idea of how many people die of malaria, about 1 million people die of malaria every year, and AIDS kills about 2 million people every year. For the longest time, malaria killed more people than anything, but now HIV/AIDS, well, at least in 2009, it was killing that many people. I really got to update my statistics here. Let's see how much more current I can get HIV versus malaria. Maybe the version of these slides that I post will have updated numbers. So it's really important that we're able to prevent malaria. This is an example of an insecticidal net. It is meant just to allow people to sleep without being bitten by mosquitoes at night if their home is not mosquito proof. It also doesn't just kill people. When children get malaria, on average, they will have 2 to 6 episodes of a recurrent malaria fever every year thereafter, which keeps them from being able to go to school, which keeps them from developing their minds normally, both because they can't go to school and also because they keep getting these really high fevers. So it is really important to the stability of world politics that we get malaria under control. All right. Okay, now this one's kind of a creepy one. Don't worry, it doesn't cause diseases in people. But this little guy is called euglena. And if I ask you which Protistan that we studied swims with a flagella, you would tell me euglena. Now, euglena not only swims with a flagella, that's this long kind of tail sort of thing. By the way, that tail pulls it through the water. It doesn't push it through the water. So see how it's coming out of its like nose? It's pulling it kind of like a helicopter through the water. Euglena not only has got a flagella, but euglena has got what's called an eye spot. Now, an eye spot is not an eye. It's probably the evolutionary ancestor of an eye. But the eye spot does have pigment that is reactive to light. And that pigment allows this little guy to know where the light is brighter and swim towards the brighter light. And why does he want to swim towards the brighter light? That is because euglena is an autotroph. Okay, the paramecium, the plasmodium, the vorticella, the paramecium, and the amoeba. Those guys were heterotrophs. This is our first autotroph, which means it can do photosynthesis. It does have chloroplasts. Their chloroplasts are more complicated than the ones we've studied already. And this guy's got an eye spot, so he knows where the light is brighter, and he just swims over there. So imagine, again, like we're looking through the microscope at a drop of pond water, and it's like we're looking on the Serengeti. Imagine if the trees go, oh, the light's brighter over there, and they just walk over to where the light's brighter or where the water's better or something like that. I could happen on another, but we could find another planet where the plants walk around. Why would they not? Right? Now, one more weird thing about euglena. Euglena does this thing, flagellum. Euglena does this thing called mixotrophy. So yes, we've categorized them as autotrophs. However, the truth is, if there is not enough light around for them to do photosynthesis, they'll eat something, which is weird, right? It would be like if you had a house plant, but if you didn't water it right, it would eat your cat. That is what euglena is like. So they're interesting and creepy. They're like a plant that walks around, and if they don't have enough light, well, they'll eat something, right? We'll start here at the beginning of the next video.